Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Ferrigno Freedom Channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to be speaking with the author of the book Unholy Trinity, written by Daniel Trevor. Let me see if I got that where I can show it to you here. Well, what the heck? Let's see. Oh, look at that. He's joining in perfectly. Go ahead and bring him in here. We were going to have my good friend John Barry here with us too, but he's on waiting on a ferry in Sweden right now, so he wants to be able to join in. How you doing, Daniel?
Oh my God. Hey, hold on. Let me just adjust my lighting here a little bit. I don't want to come off too pale or whatever. But let's see. I got to get my Hollywood lighting here. Let's see. Is that a little bit? Let's see. How's that? Looks
That
like
looks
we
good
got a
enough
little
to me.
delay going on here. Are we okay with what do you think? I mean,
No, it sounds good to me. When I talk to you, does everything sound like it's coming through perfect?
it's perfect, but I have a delay as I'm looking at what I'm looking at.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
that's
Well, it should be on a delay. It's, because of the way the broadcast software works. It's not exactly the same. So what you're seeing on your screen from mine shows a delay, though?
no. I see you talking perfectly, but when I look at me and I gesticulate like this, there's a delay of a second or two.
Oh, well,
You know what
that's
I'm
not.
saying?
That's
So I'll
definitely
try not
not.
to look at myself.
As
I'll
long
just
as
try
you're
to
not.
focus on you.
As long as you're not trying to watch it on YouTube at the same time, because it's a few seconds
Yeah, no,
delayed
no,
on
no.
YouTube.
Yeah. Let me adjust my head level here so I'm not the camera. So we're still in the green room, right? So do they
No,
call it
we're
the green room?
we're live to the world.
Oh my
it's
God,
okay.
we're live to the world.
It's okay,
Wow,
man.
that's
It's okay. We're all just regular people, man. This isn't a Hollywood production. I'm not worried about everybody looking perfect or fancy. I'm worried about getting people healthy. And
yeah,
what
no, no,
I've
no.
been.
Listen, I'm with you on that, brother. I just, like I was telling Curry, man, you're good buddy, and that's how I got to you. Of course, he introduced me to you. I said, "Hey, do you know this guy, Ferrigno?" Yeah, he says, "Yeah, I know him. Can you introduce me? I really love what he's doing, his work. He's got a great channel, and like you say, we're nothing special. In fact, we are part of what I consider the victims of false data and fake science foisted upon the populations and the doctors for decades.
Yeah.
And, it's just crazy. So we just have to be who we are. And I got to be honest, I'm a little rough around the edges. And that's only because I'm just a lower class street kid from Philly. And you got to be who you are, right?
Yeah.
And there's that saying, what is it? You could take the kid out of Philly, but you can't take the Philly out of the kid. So, and that's why I think there's certain podcasts that really, I don't know, I'm a little too rough around the edges for them. So, I don't know. I just have a feeling that some of them, their noses are a little too high and they don't want to hear about this stuff from a guy who's not as polished as some network TV dude. So anyway, but
Believe me,
thank you
I
for
don't worry about any of that. I can tell you that right off the bat. I mean, as a Christian, I've always tried to watch how I speak, but I'm not here to regulate your speech or anyone else's speech. If anybody says anything and that's the way they express themselves, I'm fine with how everybody expresses themselves. I'm still rough around the edges. I'm going to be rough around the edges the rest of my life. I like to call it maturing when I get a little bit of those rough edges smoothed off. But at the same time, we're all human. And I think if we get too far up in the air like that, we're not relatable. And then people
no,
don't
not
look
at
at it
all.
and say, this is something for me. They look at it and say, this is something for somebody else. This is something for people who have already got the genetic perfection and they've got all the money in the world and they've got everything already sorted out. And that's not the case at all. This is for everybody.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, they'll get these PR companies and they'll drill them on how to appear on certain TV shows and all that and have these scripted lines and so forth, which I guess is good. Especially if you are going to do some major network kind of things. I mean, they have their certain way, and That's fine. I understand that. But, I was telling Kerry also when I appeared on, I got invited on Dr. Ken Berry, our favorites, one of our favorite guys, right?
Yeah.
And I was nervous before, and I thought, wait, he has how many millions of subscribers and followers? He says, oh, he's got over 3 million on YouTube and more on social media. I went, oh my God, because I was new to all this, right? I said, well, if I mess up, can we go back and edit it and cut it out? He said, oh no, it's a live stream. I went, holy shit. They said, what's the matter? I said, well, I did write the book and I do know the data, but running it smoothly over my tongue and knowing the data is a little bit different. And so, oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And then turns out it did go pretty well because it went viral. And that's what really put the book on the map. I don't know if I told you this before. Yeah, that's what shot the book to #1 on Amazon for heart disease and type 2 diabetes and longevity. I went, whoa, so I got to do more of these podcasts to get the word out because that's what you're trying to do. And I really love and admire everything that you're doing. So big hugs for that, to getting the word out on a more ancestral way of eating. And what I cover in the book is just getting rid of the unholy trinity. I mean, even Ken Berry said in our interview, he says, if people just eliminated those three, they would reverse a lot of their ailments just like that, and then you add in some keto or low carb, carnivore, or whatever. They're going to expand even further from there. But it's you just got to be who you are, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's what people are starving for when it comes to content or learning about anything, is they want authenticity. They want people just to be themselves and tell their story, tell the truth the best you know it. We don't always know what the truth is. As long as we're not lying about what's going on, then we're offering something that's going to hopefully help people. Because if we're lying or we don't know the truth, then blind people can't lead other blind people anywhere. And all I know is that my experience has been so great on this that I have wanted to just share my experience so that other people can know, a regular guy can have the experience they're looking for. Now, before I get too far, I had just started the show when you called in, and I was expecting John to be here, but he texted me seconds beforehand to let me know that they haven't started loading on the ferry where he's going to have Wi-Fi, so he might be able to join us, and I'm sure he's going to have some good questions for us too. And speaking of questions, first let me go ahead and show what book we're going to be talking about here for those of you who aren't familiar with it. The Unholy Trinity: How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Made Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted, and How to Escape Their Grip. And I think a lot of people who are tuning in right now are probably already on the carnivore journey or considering a carnivore journey. So they hear a lot of these terms that they're already familiar with. But I have often said on my show, it's not just about being carnivore. It's not just about being, say, for instance, what I am, which is I do a lion diet. I don't know if you're specifically familiar with that, where I exclude anything except ruminant animals. And then there's people who go ketovore and keto, and they find all kind of help because those three things are being eliminated from their diet. So one of the things we often run into as carnivores is we get kind of treated like we're some cult group that has we're trying to suck you into something that we want you to join or something like that. But it's nothing like that at all. It's just that when you find something that changes your body and your mind so dramatically, you can't help but want to tell everybody about it, especially when you look around and you see your friends and your family are unhealthy and sick and not feeling good, and they're complaining about problems that you used to have, and you try to tell them, well, if you just do this, then that's going to fix everything. But one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people get benefits from different versions of things. And that's why, even though your book isn't directly about carnivore, I wanted to bring it on because I know there are thousands of people out there who are interested in doing something through eating properly, as my shirt says, letting food be your medicine. They're interested in that, but they're a little nervous about possibly going to something as restrictive as I keep hearing the word said when it comes to lion diet or even just carnivore diet, where they're eliminating breads and vegetables and everything else. And I thought your book was great because I think, and I haven't read all of it, I'll be honest with you. I've only read about 8 chapters of it. I've read various chapters, some that were interesting to me. But it's great because it's going to connect with a lot of people who are on the fence about all this stuff, and it's going to get them in that right ballpark. But I wanted to let you have the opportunity to do the talking today, and I wanted to ask you, first of all, to introduce yourself, a little bit of your history. You know, where did you come from in this, and why should we be listening to you on this? And we'll start there.
Well, as I said, I'm like you. And Kerry, I'm one of the victims of false data and fake science that have been pushed on the populations and the doctors for way too long. And what happened to me was a few years ago, I almost died from a heart attack. And it was a complete and total shocker to me because I was a slim, what I thought were symptom-free, Mr. Healthy, or so I thought, right? And I hadn't done the proper testing to find out the truth about what's going on inside, because all of the major diseases that kill us are silent diseases. By the time you have symptoms, you are way down the line, and it's a long road back, or it's just too late. Check out this stat. Over 50% of the people who die of a deadly first heart attack, their very first symptom of heart disease is their own death.
Yeah.
It's like, what? It's, so you would think, I think like everybody else does, well, at least there'll be some clouds before the storm, right? And then I get some symptoms, and then I go to the doctor, and the doctor fixes me. That's not how it is at all, folks. That's why, see, when I had the heart attack, I went to Google University and YouTube University and, all these studies, and I immersed myself in books and so forth. And I found this one guy, Dr. Ford Brewer, and this is, a few years ago, and his videos back then were very complicated. But even though I'm a lower class street kid from Philly, I was fortunate in that I learned how to study well early on, and that kind of thing. So I was able to find. If I didn't, I looked up the words in the dictionary, because you got to do that. If there's the stats on people finishing nonfiction books are just terrible. Because I think the authors, they write them in such a way that they assume that their audience, their target audience reader, already knows this, and this. And I didn't want to make that mistake. I wrote the book from the viewpoint of, okay, so I got to write this for like Uncle Joe or my cousin Jan. They're not technically oriented, and they want to know how, but they're smart and they can read. So if I use a technical term like endothelium, I'll put it in parentheses right after the lining of the arteries. And after I've done that 3 times, you got it. Oh, Daniel, the endothelium, that's the lining of the arteries. And that's where the LDL particles can invade the artery wall and get stuck underneath and build up plaque over time. And, I really go deep into all that kind of thing, especially in chapter 17, 18, and 19, which is deep in the cardiovascular disease. But anyway, the book was not written for doctors and scientists. And even though they need it, very badly, this information, I wrote it for the average reader of health and wellness. But I tell the reader in the beginning, right after the introduction, after I tell my story and that kind of thing, there's a page called Important Note. And I point out, I say, I know you might be thinking, without formal university credentials and degrees in medicine, organic chemistry, and all that, why the hell should I trust you? I tell them, don't. My book has more scientific references and citations than any other health and wellness book in existence. Most, if they have any at all, they'll have 200 or 300, which is good. You can find out where it's from. Mine has 1,227. And oh my God, that was an extra 100 hours right there. But I knew I needed to have that backup, because I'm not a doctor or scientist, but that's the reason why the book is unique. It's written from the viewpoint of one of the victims of the false data and screwy science. Science has been around because what they've been telling us to eat for decades is killing us.
Yes.
And so, just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness, and fix yourself. I did. I reversed 4 comorbidities that I'll tell you about. But with regard to the keto carnivore thing, I was on Dr. Sean Baker's last week, Tuesday morning. And I was discussing with him how he came to carnivore the same way I did. Because he was first, he went to low carb, keto, and then ketovore, and then carnivore. And then you're the next step over, which is the lion diet. And so I don't know if I'll wind up there or not, but all I'm saying he found it the same way. And by the way, I was applauding him for in the introduction to his book, as I was just reading it 2 weeks ago. He's telling about his background, how he was always interested in science and how the body worked and that kind of thing. And he went on to medical school and so forth. And then he was in the military in Afghanistan, taking care of our wonderful young men that were getting harmed and beat up and everything with the war. And so I was complimenting him on all that and everything. And then he said, it turns out that he then became an expert in, what was it? What is it? The nuclear warheads on intercontinental ballistic missiles. What? You are in a rarefied group of people. There's not many people that can say that. He says, yeah, when I went into the private sector afterwards, there wasn't a big demand for that. I thought that was hysterical, right? So anyway, that's in the beginning part of his book where he gives his background and everything. But the point is that I came to, when I first doing the research, I found people like Dr. Ford Brewer. I found Dr. Eric Berg, Ivor Cummins, and all these doctors and other geniuses that are on the cutting edge of health and wellness. And, in the proper human diet, Dr. Ken Berry and so forth. And fortunately, after I wrote the book, I was able to get a lot of really killer endorsements from these people, which were just like mind blowing to me because I'm starstruck with them. Right. So, and then we have our friend, Dr. Philip Ovadia, cardiologist. He's also cardiothoracic surgeon. He's done like over 3,000 heart operations, and he's carnivore. And, I'm finding all these wonderful people, but let's face it, if the world will just define keto, because keto is 80 to 90% animal fat and protein. Mm-hmm. And it's a smaller amount, much smaller, 5 to 10% carbohydrates. So if they just did that, they're going to get so much better because they're going to be eliminating all of the grains and sugars and the oils, the unholy trinity, and that kind of thing. So there's my little tangent I went on. I had to give Dr. Sean Baker a plug. But that video, it's probably not posted until about a week from now because we just did it Tuesday.
Well, that's a good update for his upcoming show, and I'll also give him a little plug too, because I love what Dr. Sean Baker is doing with Revero. At Revero.com, you're actually able to get medical professionals who are able to help you along this journey, and that is something that so many people are in dire need of. I get the question all the time, how do I find a doctor that I can talk to about this? Because my doctor is not interested in talking to me about low carb or no carb or carnivore diet. They think that it's crazy. So it's very scary for people. And I understand, having worked as an administrator at a retirement home, and especially in the elderly population, what their doctor says is as good as gold. I'm sticking with that. Even if they make a mistake or two and other things in their life, they don't skip those medicines and things that their doctors tell them to do, even though they're not getting any better, even though they're still having all these side effects and problems. So it's nice to have that as an option. Now, one thing you mentioned in your opening statement there was something that was a little different. After Carrie introduced us, I went and checked out your video with Dr. Berry, and I heard you say that you basically were switched to a ketovore type of lifestyle after your experience with the heart attack. And I wanted to revisit one thing also, was what was your diet like before the heart attack? And then I heard you mention just now that you said you went carnivore.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, the better and better I felt. I'm thinking, why am I once in a while I'd have a little bit of asparagus, that kind of thing. When I found keto, I didn't know it, but I was already doing ketovore. I was already way over into it. And so it wasn't that much of a big step to go to carnivore because, I'm already eating mostly animal products. And so that was very simple. My big mistake was I was totally sold on the propaganda and the BS of heart healthy whole grains, right? I mean, I didn't know that when you eat these hard, healthy, so-called whole grains, they turn into sugar in the body. And I didn't know any of that. So, and that is what, really destroys the arteries is the carbs and the sugar and the oils and that kind of thing. And in the first couple of chapters, when you get to it, I like to give the whole history of how did we get here?
Mm-hmm.
The book is also what you might call a situation and data analysis of this situation, what I'm about to say. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We're now approaching 50% in under 100 years. In 1930, the chronic disease rate was 7%. We're now over 60%. Never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so fast. You got to say, what the hell is happening? When you pull the strings, you find it's the unholy trinity, because we didn't die, heart attacks, heart disease and cancer. That wasn't historically not, in 1900, most people died of infectious diseases like tuberculosis, pneumonia, that kind of thing. The very first officially recorded heart attack was 1912. And cancer wasn't even like a thing until the 30s. And they became our two biggest killers right now. They're both metabolic syndrome type diseases. And what I point out is, see, there was this, I have a lot of graphs and images and that kind of thing in the book, because I want the reader to have an easier time of it so they can see what I mean when I'm talking about certain things. For example, heart disease became a big thing, and it became, on the headlines, especially in 1950, 1955 in particular, when our President Eisenhower had a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of men and women were dropping like flies in their, at the prime of their life. They go, what's going on? And then there was this joker named Ansel Keys, which I know you know about. And he was this researcher and came along, and he had this theory called the diet heart hypothesis. And that it was the meat and the butter and the cheese, and it would clog up the arteries. And it's not that way at all. He got this idea in people's minds that it was it was kind of like a shower drain that clogs up. And, it's not that way at all. In fact, the buildup of plaque is underneath the artery, not in the lumen where the blood flows. But anyway, he had that all wrong. But the reason why I bring that up is because, see, what happened was years later when they found out this process called electron microscopy, where they had these little tiny cameras that they could snake up into the arteries to do the angiograms and find out what's going on arterially. They were able to see this and discover this thing called the glycocalyx. What is that? The glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining of the artery walls, which acts as the first line of protection against what's called small, dense LDL particles, which can invade the artery wall and then get stuck underneath endothelial in this place called intima media space. And they build up there, they get stuck to proteoglycans and other chemicals, and they build up over time into plaque. And so what happens is, what they discovered was smoking destroys the glycocalyx. Smoking was an epidemic back there. Eisenhower did 2 or 3 packs a day, right? And so everybody was smoking. The doctors smoked around their patients. It was just wild, right? And then, but he had this idea that it was the cholesterol and it was building up. And once people get to believe these fake ideas, it's kind of like, it reminds me of that old, Mark Twain had a saying, wonderful. He was known as the Mr. Common Sense, right? And he said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled, because a lot of people would believe in that. And then no matter what you say to them, oh, no, it's not the cholesterol. Oh, yeah, well, my doctor, he's got a white jacket and he knows all, sees all, right? So,
well, it's accepted as biblical science today. I mean, this stuff with the cholesterol and all the things you're talking about, and it's hard for people to get past that. You're exactly right.
Exactly. And at the same time, I have it here somewhere. Let's see. At the time, after his MI, his myocardial infarction, also known as a heart attack, Eisenhower was assigned a personal physician named Paul Dudley White. Unfortunately for the president, he was good friends with Ancel Keys. So both of them, they put him on a low-fat, quote, heart-friendly diet. And then he developed type 2 diabetes. He had a stroke, multiple heart attacks, and he wound up dying of intractable heart failure, right?
He even wound up lying to the president about what his cholesterol numbers were because they would upset him so much.
You knew that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. And then at the same time, there was this other guy over in England. He was saying his name was John Yudkin, Yudkin. He was trying to bring attention to the mounting evidence that it was sugar and grains that was the source of why people were putting on weight and having more heart disease. But all the money was going behind Ancel Keys and his theory of and so by 10 years later, late 60s, early 70s, big food came in with all the low-fat, non-fat foods, but they have high carbs and sugars to make it palatable because, when you remove fat from things, it doesn't taste so good. And that's when I have this graph in the group, in the book too, where there's the diabetes started right here, right? And this is where the U.S. dietary guidelines started right here. And the obesity rate goes up like that. And the base of the pyramid, which I'm sure you've seen, recommends 6 to 11 servings of, bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, and on and on. So and that was the cause of it all. And then eventually in 1972, this guy, Dr. Yudkin, he wrote this book called Pure, White, and Deadly: The Problem with Sugar. And because what happens is, besides the smoking destroying the glycocalyx, what they discovered was the carbohydrates from grains and sugars is an even worse destroyer of the glycocalyx, and that's what causes the heart disease. And so even Dr. Ovadia I was on with his podcast, and he says that's why he's still to this day, it's the biggest killer, heart disease.
Yeah, and we've seen, I remember there were studies, or not necessarily studies, but there were groups that were funded by government entities that were coming out and saying that sugar is completely harmless. We can't find anything wrong with sugar. And that's when these cereal companies started being not afraid to talk. It was earlier than the 80s, actually, but it talked about they would just brag that it's got sugar because it's going to give you energy. I remember Sugar Smacks and all these other things that they would come out with because you would think, oh, it's going to give my kid the energy he needs to get through his day at school or something like that. And that's exactly the way I grew up, was eating that kind of stuff. And then I would wonder, see, your case is different than mine. And that's one of the things I love about having you on this broadcast today, is because I grew up struggling with my weight all of my life. I wondered, why am I eating all the things they told me I'm supposed to eat? And that included eating Cheerios and the heart-healthy cereals and, Basic 4 and Cracklin' Oat Bran, trying to eat some. And it really was just another version of a sugared cereal. And as a matter of fact, some of those actually had more sugar than the ones that I was getting away from. And I didn't know that. I was going by what the packaging said. I was going by what the nutrition experts were saying all the time, that this is what you need to be eating. I saw a commercial recently showing the two of the heavyset people from the TV show The Office talking about their experience helping their heart eating Cheerios. And I thought, well, you haven't lost any weight since the last time I saw you, so those Cheerios aren't helping you get that weight off your body. What are we advertising here? But it seems like they just want to keep pushing this nonsense. Now, I wanted to get back to this for just a moment, because I really want people who are never seen this before, who have never thought about carnivore, they're going through their life, because I meet people all the time that'll talk about, I add lemon to my water, and I make sure that I do this with fiber and that with fiber, and I'm eating the whole grain toast, and I'm eating the whatever it is they're telling me to eat. And it sounds like your diet was very similar to that, because most people seem to be on the same page of that. Can you give me like a rundown on maybe what your breakfast, lunch, and dinner was like before that led up to this heart attack? And what kind of exercise did you do? Were you an exercise person to begin with?
Well, that's the one thing that saved me. You see, heart attacks and strokes run in my family big time. So I should have had it in my 40s when I was late 30s or something, you know. But because I always made it to the gym, I was able to push that off. And I explain all that in chapter 9, which is all about exercise, the right kind of exercise to do and how that affects the body and all like that. But anyway, just to answer your question, see, my other comorbidity, which caused all of my other 3 or 4, was I didn't see after my heart attack, I found out about all these tests. So I got a lot of tests done to find out the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I knew I was going to have a bad report card, but I wanted to have a benchmark so I could measure, 3 months, 6 months down the line, so I could say, hey, I'm making improvement. And what I discovered with one of these tests was that I was a raging type 2 diabetic, and I didn't know it because there's no symptoms. The only sign of type 2 diabetes or prediabetes is that you're overweight. I'm one of the 1% of the population that can be on the slim side and be raging type 2 diabetic. I was just like Dr. Peter Attia. He got his from eating so much, drinking so much Gatorade. And, he was like all these triathlons. He was an amazing athlete. So that's what saved him being showing up to work out all the time. So I was this raging type 2 diabetic, and I didn't know that having a degree of diabetes, wherever you are on the spectrum, is the source root cause of all of the major killers: heart attacks, strokes, cancers, Alzheimer's, dementia, the neuropathy, which results in amputations, PCOS, sleep apnea. I mean, the list goes on and on. It all starts with the inflammation. We've known this for a long time. Even in 2004, over 20 years ago, it was a cover of Time magazine, and it was called The Secret Killer: Why Inflammation is the Silent Killer or Cause of Heart Attacks, Strokes, Dementia, Cancers, and much more. Cover story. So by the time we had discovered that a few years earlier than that. But anyway, it's the inflammation. And I didn't know that because that was the source root cause of my cardiovascular disease, which is the point of why I'm bringing it up. And it was also the source root cause of my fatty liver disease, because I didn't know that one of the tests showed I had elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase, right? And then I found this guy online, his brilliant man, what's his name? Ivor Cummins. He's a brilliant biochemical engineer. And he had this elevated GGT. So I took the dive into that. What is that? Why is it? And the reason why that's so important, and doctors don't test for it, is if they test anything, it'll be ALT, ASP, ALT. But they don't check this GGT, and it's so important because, and I don't know why the medical community seems to be blind to this, but life insurance companies, they're not so concerned with medical science. They just want to know who to accept, who to reject, right? Because it's just business to them. That's why they're the most successful companies in the world, been around since the 1600s. They're fantastic at calculations. These life insurance actuaries found out that the number one predictor of all-cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. I'm thinking, well, if the life insurance companies know this, why don't our doctors know this? I was discussing this with Dr. Berry. You may have noticed that. And they don't check it because, it's just not part of the panels that they order. And the other one detects the diabetes. Let me just say this one, and then, you can ask that. I have chapter 7. There's a section in there. It's called the most important health test you've never had. And that's because doctors don't order it, and it detects where you are on the diabetic state, by diabetic spectrum, whether you're pre-diabetic, full-blown diabetic. And I go into all that. But anyway.
Well, one of the things that was interesting about the diabetes part of the conversation is that my father was a type 2 diabetic in his mid 50s, and I'm in my early 50s, so it was something I was already thinking about approaching. And when I was 48, I was close to 100 pounds heavier than I am right now, so I was definitely on the table for that. And a quick little aside, you mentioned all of the things that spring from that, including Alzheimer's. They're calling Alzheimer's disease now type 3 diabetes, that it's that closely related to it. So it's a whole different ballpark.
But almost all the people that have Alzheimer's are type 2 diabetic. So that's why they're calling it that. The numbers
My doctor
are so high.
would basically base any of his decisions about whether or not I was diabetic was based on my fasting glucose level, which I think is like the worst possible thing you can do because it doesn't show any of the other factors. And I think you can let me know more about that. But also, one of the reasons doctors don't offer these other tests that do show more, and we can even talk about the cholesterol tests that they don't offer, is because the insurance companies aren't going to cover those tests, and the doctor doesn't want to be telling you to go get tests that's going to cost you more money and make you mad at them. Would you say I'd be right in saying that?
You are absolutely dead right on that, because here's the thing. That's why I asked Dr. Ford Brewer, reached out to him. I said, can you write a chapter in my book? Because he's brilliant. He's internationally acclaimed preventive medicine doctor out of Johns Hopkins, but he's brilliant at all the testing. I said, I want you to write what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can buy online without needing their doctor's prescription. That way you yourself can find out if you got something lurking, ready to pounce, and or you're somewhere in between that needs attention. And because a lot of times, okay, so you find out you want to get this and this one, and you say to your doctor, hey, I'd like to get XYZ tests and this one over here. What happens a lot of times, unfortunately, is the doctor will say, oh, you don't need that. You don't need that. You're fine. And the only reason they're saying that is because they don't know what it is and wouldn't know how to analyze it anyway. So you yourself can find out. I got that chapter in there. I explain what it all means too. So if for anything else, you got to get that chapter 22, which he calls Don't Guess, Test, because you find out what are all the most important blood labs and scans, because you have to find out where you are on the diabetic spectrum. And what that test is, it's called, the most important one is that the doctors don't order. It's called the OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin.
Okay.
And doctors don't order it. It's crazy, because that will tell you. I mean, that's how I discovered. I discovered that my score was way over 200, and that put me well into the diabetic danger zone and the cardiovascular danger zone, because I didn't know any of this. Because most doctors, what they'll do is what you'll see on your blood labs. They test fasting blood glucose, like you said, and an A1C. And even the American Diabetes Association, who I don't trust very much as far as I can throw them, even they say, hey, look, if you're just going to do those two, you're going to miss 70, 80% of the patients if you just do those two. You have to take it further. And there was this other study, oh my God, it's out of 2019, out of Johns Hopkins, and they did this, it was a big study, and they found that 74% of doctors, this is what makes the whole scene just crazy worse, 74% of doctors, now we're talking family physicians, GPs, internists, and cardiologists, 74% they discovered that do not know how to properly diagnose or test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? I had so many WTF moments when I did all this research. I thought, I got to get all this into the book so that my reader can go, what? They've been lying to us all this time, or they've been keeping this from us? If they know this, oh my God. Well, there's a certain, you can't blame a lot of the doctors, because it's just part of the system. They have to work within this efficiency model. The usual visit with a doctor is 7 minutes, and you're in and out, and they got to keep it moving and that kind of thing. And it's just unfortunate that it's set up that way. So we can't hold it against them, because, a lot of them are just saving our lives all day long. They're 24-hour heroes, right? We show up with our broken bones and They got to suture up the wounds and remove the bullets and steering wheels from our chests and all that kind of stuff. So I love all of them. Even my older daughter, Chloe, she got her degree in medicine. She works in the ER. I talk to her about this stuff all the time. And she's telling me, the doctors, they may talk about, they may mention the diet and exercise, but nobody listens to it. They just want a pill or a procedure. So, the medical schools are funded by Big Pharma, and they want them reaching for the prescription pad. They want them to go for drugs and procedures, more drugs and more procedures, because that's where the money is. They've estimated, I think I have this in the introduction, that by 2026, the expansion of the pharmaceutical industry, the drug industry, is going to go to $1.5 trillion, right? And that's up 35% from 2016. So healthy populations are not going to make that kind of profit for these people. And that's why I call it the other unholy trinity: big food, big pharma, and big medicine. And I'm sure there's beautiful, wonderful people in all three of them, and it's just a minority. But, you have big food making these purposely addicted, quote, foods that send us toward big medicine, which then send us toward big pharma. And around we go. And there's no education about any of this. And that's why I've taken the effort in the first 2 chapters of the book to tell how we got here, how we got into this catastrophic situation where people are overfed and undernourished and over-medicated and undereducated and over-psych drugged. And it's just wild, And then in chapter 12, I don't know if you got into that, but I get into the whole, that's called Eat the Right Meat and Help the Planet. Because, we're getting hit with all this nonsense from these people that go, oh, yes, you got to think of the planet. It's such a bunch of BS. But I think your audience might enjoy that too, because I don't pull any strings on that.
I actually did read chapter 12, and I loved it. One of the things I found is I've read each of the chapters I've had a time to read so far. Okay. I said, it's like this guy watched all of my videos. I'm not saying you did that, because as I went on this journey, I started finding each of these little tidbits myself, and then I would share them with my audience. So it's so nice that I think what makes your book so amazing to me is I get people that ask me all the time, all these different questions that I've answered 100 times on another video somewhere else. And almost all of it's right here in your book that answers a lot of these questions. And this thing with the glucose tolerance test with insulin response, I have not been able to get a doctor to agree with me that I need to get my insulin checked. And I don't know why they're so resistant. I'm like, hey, I'll pay for it. But you say you can get those on your own.
Well, yeah. I write an introduction to Dr. Ford Brewer's chapter, and I tell where you can get these tests online without needing a doctor's prescription. Let's say he'll give you all of them except like 3 or 4 or whatever. There's a place called requestatest.com. I give you all this information. The way it works is this: there's a couple of places you can go to. You got to know what you're looking for, and you get that information from the book, and you pick out the one you want. And the way it works is you whip out your credit card, you pay for it online. They email you a requisition form that you print out. You take it to your local lab, which is either going to be a LabCorp or a Quest Diagnostics, which are thousands all over the place, right? Even in Europe and so forth. And so it's going to be near any hospital. It's going to be near where you find any doctors, because it's very easy to do. You go in, you bring them the form, they draw the blood, and within a couple of days you get your results. It's easy peasy. So if your doctor doesn't want to order, because a lot of times what they'll do is, I was doing this one, I did this interview with a guy who was one of the senior administrators to the Cedars-Sinai Heart Center in Beverly Hills, the world famous center. And he was telling me, he says, it's this efficiency model that if you don't have a history of diabetes or it's not in your family or whatever, they're not going to order the insulin. So I think you can get it for, I don't know, $19, which means the hospital or the doctor gets it for about $4, right? So you got to find out yourself. Just find out what those things are and where you are on the diabetic spectrum, because again, that leads to your cardiovascular disease and all your other metabolic problems. And my other comorbidities was, besides the cardiovascular disease and the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, I also had osteoporosis, because they're finding, and I cover that in chapter 13, osteopenia and osteoporosis and other bone issues, because they're finding more and more with the push by big food that those symptoms and those problems are descending lower and lower ages. I start off the chapter with the study where they're finding it in people that are 35 to 50 having these issues. And that's why I recommend you got to get a DEXA scan. I think it's $100 or something, or ask your doctor for it. DEXA, DEXA scan, and you can find out what's going on there. But if your doctor tells you you're too young for it, show him this study, right? Because this is what's happening now. And the interview that I just told you about with this administrator from the Cedars-Sinai Heart Center, he was saying, I was working out with I had an injury in my back, and he wanted me to get a DEXA scan. And the technician, I went in there, he says, "What are you doing here? You're too young." He said, "What? I'm supposed to have some kind of issue first, and then you can check me?" So the way it's set up is they want you damaged and sick and all that before they even put you into the system, and they'll approve it for insurance. You can't hold it against them so much. That's just the way it's set up. And our grassroots efforts, all the beautiful, wonderful work that you're doing, Kerry Mann and the rest of us, as well as Dr. Sean Baker and the rest of the crew, Dr. Ovadia, Dr. Berg, and all of them, we're going to we are starting to turn things around. That's why we have, certain celebrities and, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people going on the Carnivore, at least keto. I mean, if the world just went keto, they'd be eliminating a lot of the junk and the unholy trinity, which is causing so much of this, the disease and illness, because, it really is true. They make us fat, sick, and addicted, and we have to learn how to escape their grip. And that's why it's a bit of a how-to book, because I give a lot of tips and tricks on what I did because I was addicted to a lot of the things that a lot of your audience might be right now, or some of your audience, because I know your audience is more advanced in the program. But
there's tons of people out there that are still trying to figure out what they're doing. Real quick, I do want to bring in, we have a normal guest on my live stream, which is John Barry. And John is here all the way from Sweden today, so hopefully we'll get a good signal with him. Say hi, John.
Hey, how you doing, Dante? How you doing, Dan?
Hey, good to see you. Nice that you can join us. So you're floating on the water now, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. You can have a look out there. You can see.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So it's great. Awesome. Yeah, man, it's really good to be here. I got to tell you, Dan, I've been reading your book, and it is fantastic. I restate what Dante said. I've never seen a book that brings it all together as well as your book. I mean, you've done phenomenal research, and it's fantastic. And if there was one book I could recommend to somebody that was on a journey, that wanted to improve their health and wellness, I would say read this book first. It's fantastic job. Really well done.
John, thank you so much for saying that. It was a lot of work, but it was a labor of love, as they say. And, I was happy to do it. And, oh my God, I just, my biggest reward from this is because, look, I can tell you, you don't get rich selling health and wellness books. Believe me, that's just, even though it's, it's now an international bestseller, I have become very wealthy, so to speak, in the fact that I'm hearing back from people all over the planet. They're going, "Daniel, this is amazing." And it's really helped. And that's where I get wealthy, so to speak. It's not because, I always thought when you have bestsellers, there's a mansion and a yacht somewhere close by. And I didn't realize that's only if you write like Harry Potter or something like that, and then they turn them into movies.
Nonfiction bestsellers don't hit the jackpot, huh?
No. So anyway, my point is that I'm thrilled that people are receiving it well and changing their life.
Yeah.
And that's the wealth that I get from it. So thank you for recognizing that, John, and I really appreciate those kind words.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, I think the mansion, Dan, it's in here, and
Yeah,
I get that feeling.
great point. I
It's
love that. I'm stealing that.
there were so many fantastic things that I saw in your book, Dan, that were new to me as well. And I'd like to ask you to comment on a couple of them because I thought they were fantastic. One of
Sure.
them that really flipped me out was about the blue zones. We've all seen this nonsense about, blue zones means we all need to be vegetarian. And I thought it was fantastic what you brought up about specifically talking about Okinawa and how Okinawa, they eat plenty of meat and pork and fish and everything else. But it's actually, I'm trying to think of the wording. I think that you said that they eat more beef, pork, and seafood than any other region in Japan, and none of their
Exactly.
centurions are vegetarians.
Listen, I found the studies. They actually took the deep dive into it. See, chapter 3, just before, it's about we are built for a high-fat, low-carb diet, right? And I go into how, these bodies were ancestral. I got pictures of these hunter-gatherers from like 1900 and Aborigines from sometime in the 30s. And they are just fit and chiseled. And they got, and they don't have any fitness centers near them,
Yeah.
right? And so I know after they've just read that, I say, okay, so I can hear some of you now. This is chapter 4. It's called Shattering Myths About the Blue Zones. And I say, look, I know you're saying, hey, what about the vegetarians in the, I said, well, look, first of all, they're not the vegetarian zones because they're not vegetarian, except for there's one of the blue zones is called Loma Linda, but they only live to about 85. But see, the researcher, Dan Buettner, he's the author of the book, The Blue Zones. He wanted to find some place in the United States where people lived longer than usual. And the place that he settled on was Loma Linda. But anyway, when they actually took a look at, let's say, what you were talking about, Okinawa, they analyzed and spoke to and surveyed all of the centenarians and super centenarians. A super centenarian is somebody that's older than 110. There were no vegans or vegetarians found amongst any of the centenarians or super centenarians. Boom. Right.
There you go.
I write that in there. And then I write in parentheses, I say something like, so all this time we've been led to believe that the blue zones are vegetarian, and that's why they live to 100 or more. It's a total bunch of BS. I didn't spell the BS out in the book, but I just, So I say, and I give all the references. As I was telling Dante, I have more scientific references than any other health and wellness book in existence. And so, because I knew I needed that backup, because I didn't want anybody to ever say, oh, well, where's the science? Show us where they did this double-blind study and the meta-analyses of this and that. So I provided it all. But yeah, the blue zones, and then we had I had that section how a serving of religion got on your plate.
Oh yeah, Could you tell us all about that? Yeah, the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the disaster that they inflicted. I think that they killed more people than Stalin did, at the end of the day. And I thought your study on them was absolutely spot on, because that was really a terrific piece.
That's great. Well, I'm glad. I didn't want to pull any punches. I mean, that's besides all the wonderful doctors and scientists that wrote me these wonderful endorsements, and besides all the carnivores and the keto gang and the whole thing, I also have this guy. He's Dr. Lou Ignaro. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery of nitric oxide, which is so incredibly important for the arteries and the vascular system, and other geniuses on the cutting edge of this and that, and even guys that are more in the middle of the road, like Dr. Mark Hyman. But he's a 15-time New York Times bestselling author. And I thought, well, that's got to attract some eyeballs too. So anyway, my point is that I wanted to just really, because he said that line in his he says, Daniel pulls no punches and tells you exactly what it is. And so, yeah, I have that in there, the blue zones, and how John Kellogg, when he was 12 years old, was put in charge of typesetting this book that Ellen G. White, who was an Adventist, one of the founders, had put together. And it was all about the dangers of eating meat, because the meat made you more carnal and made you want to masturbate and have sex and all that kind of thing. And it was a very big deal to them. In fact, John Kellogg, who wound up, he's this big cereal guy. He wrote a book. I can't remember the name of it. I have it in chapter 4, and he said that the best way to stop boys from masturbating is you have to circumcise them without using any anesthetic, so that the pain will be a salutary effect upon the urge, and so that will stop. It was just amazing. And then for the girls, he recommended pouring acid on their, I don't want to say the word, but their item down there, or cutting it out. It's like, oh my God. And so they were big on the grains and all that kind of thing. And I remember early on, they had made by the 20s, he had made this cereal that was meant to be just like an occasional after dinner treat, that because it was so sweet. By the 1950s and 60s, it became the standard breakfast cereal. And so,
what was the name of that one? Do you remember that one?
The name of the cereal, or I don't know. I didn't find the name of the cereal. They just were promoting all of these grains and cereals and that kind of thing, because the grains are just, and I would, before made my transformation, before I had the heart attack and everything, as I was telling Dr. Berry, my breakfast would be like a so-called heart healthy granola that had to have at least 60 carbs of carbohydrates, or grams of carbohydrates, along with, I'm sure, some high fructose corn syrup and all. And I didn't know that any of that was going to be damaging to my arteries and cause me to have type 2 diabetes, which leads to all the killers, the silent killers. And I didn't know any of that. So I had a high carb diet, and that's what was killer for me. Thank you, John.
I talked about when I was a kid, I had a hard time keeping the weight off, and I tried to participate in sports and things like that, but I was always the kid that had to wear the trash bag over my body while I ran around the track, because they were trying to burn the fat off of me and things like that. And I remember eating Wheaties cereal because my heroes were telling me,
champions.
Yes, exactly. It's the breakfast of champions, and it's good. Instead of eating the sugary cereal, you eat this, which was like, oh my God, it was like eating pieces of frozen cardboard or something. It wasn't frozen, touch, but it was hardened pieces of cardboard. And I noticed in chapter 10, you talked about being addicted to wheat, and I haven't had a chance to read that chapter, but there's something that I found interesting that I haven't had a chance to look into. So I wanted to see if you had any awareness of this, of why our wheat isn't wheat. I mean, you talked about faith a little bit a while ago, and you talked about religion. I think they're two different things. When you got somebody who's religious, they go around telling people to cut body parts off and do weird things to take care of themselves. When you have faith, you have a personal relationship with your Creator, and He's telling you different things. And I can tell you one thing: I have been eating meat for 3.5 years, and if anything, it's helped me to control some of those urges, because my mind isn't so full of garbage that I make stupid mistakes. But this thing about this new wheat now, a lot of people want to say, well, I should be able to eat bread. Jesus ate bread. What's wrong with bread? What's wrong with wheat? And I think there's two things. One, like you said, that it can cause an addiction. But I think there's another side to it, is I think our wheat has all been replaced with something that's not wheat.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Yeah, you're right. In chapter 10, I say it's called, Are You a Wheat Addict? And the reason I bring that up is because well, first of all, I give this image of a guy, well, it's his skull. It's 100,000 years old, and he's got perfect teeth, no missing teeth, no tooth. And I asked the reader, I said, do you think he had an orthodontist or floss or brush 3 times a day? No. And then, and he's from 100,000 years ago, and that's his skull. And then when they started, we didn't even start eating wheat and grains until about 9 or 10,000 years ago. And when they exhumed bodies from after that point towards the present, they would find all the tooth decay, missing teeth, all these new diseases were coming around. Not as bad as the last 100 years, but the diameter and the length of the bones got smaller. Men shrunk 5 inches. Women shrunk 3 inches. It was a disaster. And they used the wheat and grains as fallback food. This is what the anthropologists and bioarchaeologists said. They use it as a fallback food because, as we know, our diet for millions of years has consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat, nose to tail, right? That was it. And what we might pick off a tree or a vine, but only when those berries were in season, right? And so what happened was they found out that clever humans figured out that if they crushed the seeds of these plants and they warmed them up, maybe with some water, that kind of thing, they made something like a porridge. And that allowed them to survive another day or another week or another month. But their health and wellness took a serious toll. And so what happened was in the late 60s, early 70s, Big Ag came along. And, prior to that, it was always, it grew to shoulder height. You see the fields, amber waves of grain and all that, right? And what they did was they had this new process called chemical mutagenesis and radiation mutagenesis. And what that does is it amps up this chemical called gliadin, Gliadin, gliadin. What does that do? It attaches to the opiate receptors of the brain, the same opiate receptors as morphine and heroin. It doesn't get you high or relieve pain. What it does, it makes you crave more of the things that have grains and wheat in them, like your bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, and on and on. And when Big Ag and Big Food discovered that, they put it in everything. Check out this stat. The average supermarket has 60,000 products, right? Mm-hmm. 59,000 have wheat or some form of wheat in them.
That was going to be my question.
The aliases, there's about a dozen aliases that they try to hide things in the wheat. And even Twizzlers, next time you're going down the candy aisle, you look at the second ingredient and it's wheat. It's just crazy. They're really coming after our opiate receptors now because they know that. And 59,000 out of the average 60,000 products in a grocery store, they have wheat or some form of wheat because they hide it from us. It's just kind of like the sugar. I think I cover it in chapter 3 or 4, where there's 262 names that they have for sugar. Mm-hmm. And so you look at a package and it says, let's say sugar is the second ingredient. You already know you want to avoid that. But then the 4th or 5th ingredient is Florida crystals. Oh, that sounds nice. Right?
I'd like some Florida crystals.
And then the 6th one is maltodextrin. Oh, I don't know what that is. And so you wind up with a dozen or more, or multiple names, or the way they hide it. They'll have these different named sugars in there, so it's mostly a sugar product, and so they're hiding it from us that way too. So you really have to, you got to get knowledgeable about all this to protect ourselves and our families. I mean,
Dan,
why is it that
about wheat and as far as how it affects blood sugar? And of course, wheat is going to have gluten in it, and that's going to have a whole pile of problems right there. But I saw something in your book as well about the speed at which wheat will raise blood sugar even faster than a Snickers bar. Can you comment on that?
Oh, my God. Well, that's it. Wheat raises the blood sugar, which is very important that we have to keep an eye on. Higher than table sugar, even higher than a Snickers bar. So that's why, starting about 100 years ago is when we got the onslaught of all the candy bars and the snacks. And snacking was never even a thing. We did intermittent fasting just as a natural thing because, let's face it, we were lucky to eat once a day. And as we develop, these evolutionarily developed bodies are used to just eating that way. And our brains got bigger because, when we were hunting a large animal, let's say we wanted to feed the whole tribe, and we were hunting in mastodon, and there was a half a dozen of us or so with spears. We'd have to develop language and signals so that, okay, you go over there and I'll get it from this side, or some kind of, and it created bigger brain. What is it? I went from 40 cubic centimeters to like 140 cubic centimeters with development of the brain and more brain cells and what's called, that's why autophagy and intermittent fasting is so great, because you turn on this thing called BDNF, which they had. It's very ancestral, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which grows new brain cells. And that's why intermittent fasting is so great. You got to get some of that into your, and I have that all in chapter 8 with tips and tricks of how to do it and how to approach it easily and that kind of thing. And chapter 9, don't miss either, because an important one I'll bring up there, it's all about what's the best exercise for people over 40. They did a big study. It was like a meta-analysis of 95 studies, and they had 2 groups. It was, I can't remember how many people, though it was, tens of thousands. And they wanted to figure out was it cardio or was it resistance training for people over 40? And they measured it against all of the metabolic markers like, HDL, triglycerides, A1C, and the rest. And they followed them, and within 1 month, they found that, no, actually this was 3 to 4 months for this one. There's another one I want to tell you about that, this 1 month. This was 3 to 4 months. They found dramatic improvements in all of the metabolic markers. I have this chart in there that shows, the dramatic improvements in your A1C and your HDL and all the metabolic markers. And then the ones that did the cardio, and those are for the people that doing resistance training. In other words, the weights, the resistance machines, and that kind of thing. And the people doing the cardio or the aerobics, really minuscule amount of improvements, right? So the way to go is that if you're after 40, this is what the science has discovered. It's best to do resistance training and pick up the weights, that kind of thing, because there's this other thing called muscle glucose uptake, which pulls. When you exercise your muscles, you pull the glucose out of the bloodstream where it can do harm and into your muscles where it can be used for energy. So that's another reason why you want to work the muscles. And let's face it, the 3 of us, 12,000 years ago, there was no reason for us to jog in the woods for an hour, right? What was that all about? Why would we be jogging? We would sprint either to chase an animal or
something was chasing you.
Exactly. But there was no jogging. There were no treadmills. There was just like, are you kidding me? So it's just pretty wild. And the other study I wanted to tell you about that I talk about, the reason why exercise in a fasted state is so effective is because what happens is it's also very ancestral, because let's face it, when we were hunting, we were either hungry or starving, right? So it's very evolutionarily consistent. And Hollywood trainers have known for a long time that if they worked out their actors and so forth in a fasted state, they could just get them in tremendous shape. That's what Hugh Jackman, the Wolverine, he got completely ripped. He did the 16-hour, and I even have a couple of studies in there. They had this one group that did fed exercise. In other words, they ate breakfast, and the other group did fasted exercise. And they followed them for 1 month. And after just 1 month, the ones that did the fasted exercise lost 300% more fat mass than the other guys that ate breakfast. That's huge. It's just like, it's unbelievable. So, wow. That's what I do. I try to get to the gym towards the end of my fast. I try to do 16 to 18 hours a day, or not try, I do at least 16 up to 18. And I try to, but do it however your schedule allows, but get it in a fasted state if you want to really cut back quickly on the fat mass.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about wheat earlier being in 90% of the products. And the fact that I've got to walk through the grocery store to get to the meat that I sometimes buy, I am shocked at some of the things that I see, that it's like they're not even hiding it anymore. They got products that look like, here's your cereal. It's going to be Pop-Tarts with syrup on top or something like that. That's going to be your cereal. But then you see all these other foods that are claiming that they're healthy. So people who are coming to this for the first time, I mean, there's a lot of lion dieters in here. There's a lot of carnivores in this live stream right now. But I'm hoping somebody is watching this for the first time and they're looking at their life and saying, why is it that I buy all of the stuff I'm supposed to buy? I buy the whole grain breads, I buy all of these things, and I'm not making any progress. And the thing that they're not seeing is that what your book points out is how these companies have basically gotten away from all the natural things that we used to be able to eat. Even good companies at one time, like I was reading about General Foods in the 1940s, one of their prerequisites was you have to use natural ingredients. And then in like 47 or 49, they hired a chemist. Then the chemist was even thinking to himself, what am I going to work at a food company for? They don't need chemistry over there. But they were trying to work out natural ingredients that they could use maybe chemical philosophy on and come up with easier ways to make things, because they were trying to make life easier for the American housewife at the time, specifically because, back then that was kind of common that one person was at home, one person was at work, or I'm sure there were some men who worked at home, but I mean, culturally that probably wasn't the case. So they were trying to come up with ways to make their life easier, because it took forever to make all the food. I mean, they would just be working on it all the time. But then there was a switch where one company filed a patent on how to make Jell-O pudding, not necessarily Jell-O brand pudding, but pudding, without taking a very long time, reducing the cooking time tremendously. But they were using like a myriad of artificial products for the very first time in this patent. So they hadn't even made the product. But as soon as General Foods CEO saw that there was this patent out that this other company was going to make this product, they said, well, we gotta get there before them. And then it was like, okay, all the rules are out the window. Why was it not illegal to even do something like that? I don't know if that's something that you've touched on at all, but you would think that at some point there should have been something that said you can't just put anything in here and call it food.
Well, look, there's just so much corruption, Dante, that just people look the other way. I don't know. This is maybe more of a philosophical question, but it seems like when you get money and people close together, there's just kind of something that happens, and they either look the other way or they participate. It's just crazy when you get money involved. It's just pretty wild. And what you're talking about is people, they don't understand how important the blood glucose and the insulin is in the foods that they eat, because all of these things raise the blood sugar, right? The grains, they think they're heart healthy whole grains. And instead of using a regular Danish, they'll have a heart healthy grain Danish, right? Mm-hmm. Whole grains. And they don't realize, and I covered this very early on. In
actuality, it might be considered heart healthy. They might say it's heart healthy because it's, quote, low fat. And the way that you make it low fat is by increasing the sugar. So the fat percentage is actually lower, and it's actually worse for you. One of the things that I thought you really hit on, Dan, well in the book was insulin. Watch your insulin, watch your insulin, watch your insulin. I thought you really did a fantastic job discussing insulin and the fact that insulin resistance is the number one cause of chronic inflammation. That leads to heart disease, IBS, Crohn's disease, all the other chronic illnesses. Can you discuss, Dan, for the audience, please, how insulin resistance comes to be, and then how the inflammation results in damage to the endothelium and heart disease and everything else?
Great question. On page 2 of chapter 1, I get into this. You have to know about the two most fundamental players in the processing of the food that you put in your mouth. And those are glucose and insulin. You eat something and your glucose goes up. And if it goes up too high because of what you ate or frequent eating, the pancreas senses that and emits or secretes some insulin to bring it down or to keep it in a balanced, normal range, right? And that's a natural process that goes on in life. But when you have from either frequent eating and or, eating the wrong foods that are going to raise your blood glucose high, hour after, and then your insulin goes up, and it's hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month, and so on. You develop what's called hyperinsulinemia. That means hyper is too much insulin. Emia means in the blood. Too much insulin in the blood, hyperinsulinemia. And when that happens after a certain period of time, you get what you would achieve a state called insulin resistance, because the cells come to reject or resist the insulin due to the overload. There's just too much. Just think of like a suitcase. You can't get anything more in. The suitcase is resisting you, right? And you can't get any. Just like the guys that are pushing the people in Japan, they're pushing the bodies into the into the subway, things like that. Or like a song that's just, oh my God, if I hear that song again or I hear that commercial again, I'm going to throw something at the television, right? So it's just too much. It's an overload of something. And that starts the inflammation and the inflammatory process, first of all, within the arterial walls. And as you know, the arteries and the capillaries and everything else, they go through the whole body. And that spreads the inflammation everywhere. And so that's, I cover that very early on. So I hope people really pay attention to the beginning. I have the book divided into part 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And part 1 has all the basics. So if they could really concentrate on that and then jump around wherever you want. But if they can at least get through the part 1, because I have all the basics in there, like what you're talking about, that's the start of the inflammation. And the inflammation is, as we covered, is the source of all of the major killers these days that are silent diseases that just people don't know. And there's one other thing I'd like to bring up that people don't know about, and with regard to the money too. This is chapter 17. There was a major study, government funded, $100 million, large study, 5,200 people, a little bit under, like 5,170 something. And they divided them into 2 groups, and one got invasive procedure. It was called the ischemia trial. And they divided them into 2 groups. One group got invasive procedures like CABG, C-A-B-G. That's coronary artery bypass graft. That means an open heart surgery, bypass surgery. And the other one's got PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which means a stent. So you either got that, the stent, or the bypass, and maybe some meds, that kind of thing, blood pressure medications and statins and all that. The other group, they sent them in the direction of lifestyle. Stop eating the junk, lose 30 pounds, get back to the gym, doing all that kind of thing, right? And they followed them very closely for 4 years. Because you see, they wanted to prove that these invasive procedures were the real deal. Because that's where the money is, right? Cracking people's chests open. Dr. Ovadia will tell you all that. But they were a failure. It was a failure. They failed to show that these invasive procedures prevented heart attacks. And then right after that, there was the Courage trial and the Orbita trial. They proved the same thing. They were failures. And these 3 trials rocked the cardiology community and cardiology world.
I'm sure, Dan, that when they found that out, that the lifestyle interventions were better, they got on the news and told everybody, right? So that we could all know that. I'm sure that's what happened, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, but even though there was no change or no difference, you'd think that I asked the reader in the book, do you think these invasive procedures would now come to a halt, or at least slow down a bit? The graph is like this. It's just going out and because let's face it, there's no way that the board of directors or the CEO of the cardiology clinic or the hospital is going to want to see all that revenue disappear. Now, to be clear, they can be life-saving interventions if the person's having a heart attack, if there's some emergency happening in the hospital, that kind of thing. But that's only 15% of the time. The other 85% of those invasive procedures are done for prevention. And these studies prove that they don't work. So I tell my reader, I say, look, if your doctor's saying, hey, I think we should maybe do a stent, tell him about these studies, and then he'll know that you know. And then you ask him again, okay, so explain to me again why you think I should do this. Because, they want you to do a stress test. And, oh, my God, that is another scam. The The stress test, and I think that's in chapter 17 or 18. Anyway, in order to determine any potential problem, and Dr. Ford Brewer, he even wrote a book about this. It's called Prevention Myths, Why Stress Tests Can't Predict Your Heart Attack and Which Tests Actually Do. And why is that? Your doctor will say, let's do a stress test. And a lot of people will pass their stress test with flying colors and then die of a heart attack. That was Tim Russert, the guy who had this Sunday morning TV show called Meet the Press. Very popular. People liked him and everything. He has passed his stress test with flying colors, and he died of a heart attack. He was in the studio the day before, just passed that. There was this wonderful comedian actor, which I just enjoyed so much. What's his name? Gary Shandling.
Looks like we lost him.
Oh, where did John? We lost John. John, come back, John. The waves are hitting him. Yeah, so Gary Shandling, he passed his stress test with, he was wonderful. I love that guy. And he died of a heart attack, and he was only in his early 60s. There was that lead singer from that old group, the Monkees, from the 60s and 70s, and he was only in his he had his, passed his stress test and died of a heart attack. And then we had Alex Trebek, who had the game show. Hey, John, you're back. And he passes a stress test with flying colors and had the stress test. Passed the stress test and had the heart attack. He survived, but about a year or two later, he succumbed to pancreatic cancer, sadly. That was me. I passed my stress test with flying colors too, and I still had the heart attack. And here's the reason why that, and Dr. Ford Brewer covers this in his book, and that's why I had to put that in my in mine too. The reason why that is because in order to detect if there's any potential problem with a stress test, you have to have at least 50% blockage in the arteries, at least 50%. However, over 70% of all the heart attacks that occur with less than 50%. It's like, what? So what are we doing here? I mean, this study I have in my book that you and your audience can read right now. Why don't the doctors follow this? Why don't they understand it? It's very clear. So, but again, there's so much money wrapped into that section of the book I call the wicked triangle, which is the stress test, the cath lab, and then you wind up with a stent. And before you go into the cath lab, the catheter lab where they do all the stents, you have to sign a release that if he gets in there and finds and he decides that he has the permission to put in a stent without your consulting with you. You've already given that permission, and it's kind of like they're like a hammer looking for a nail. Because there's so much money. Even Dr. What was his name? Dr. William Davis. He was an interventional cardiologist, and he did a ton of stents. And he even said, "Yeah, I would make $2,000 a pop. I'd do 6 or 10 a day." I said, "What?" I say, "Oh my God!" So there's no way that they're going to want to see all that disappear, because if that goes away, all the invasive procedures and so forth. Institutions and careers would disappear, because there goes the mountain retreat and the beach house and the kids in Ivy League and the Mercedes down to a Chevy, and it would just all change. So
anyway, I think a lot of that's how a lot of this started at the very beginning. Is people's reputations got staked on certain things that they said or did, and then when they found out their own research was incorrect, like I think you mentioned in the first couple of chapters about Ansel Keys. Knowing the things that he said were wrong, but sticking with it because he was getting financed by the companies who wanted to sell these products, who wanted to sell vegetable oils and wanted to sell sugar and things like that. So it starts there and it continues there on down the line. Everybody, like when you have a doctor who, like you just described, he says, "Hey, I can get a payday anytime I want, and I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not breaking the law. I'm following the guidelines. I'm doing exactly what they said." And then that's where somebody who, I heard Dr. Berry say conspiracy-minded people. I'm going to go ahead and call myself a conspiracy-minded person, because typically conspiracy-minded people are just people who know the truth before everybody else. But what it looks like now is that even though back then it was propaganda because they wanted to sell products, now it's more like, well, we've got everybody hooked on all this stuff that keeps us weak and sick and malleable as a people. Now we can just keep, pushing down this same direction until we have full control over everybody. And that's where it gets to be really heartbreaking, and people don't feel like they have a way out. And one of the things I like about your book is it's good for any type of person's health, whatever health condition they're in. If they're in perfect shape and they want to find out anything about what's going on with their food, this book has almost every answer I could have asked for in just what little I've read. It's already covered a lot of the things that I've spent 3.5 years finding out about. If you've got somebody who is already, like a mother who's trying to figure out what to do for their children, it doesn't necessarily tell them how to deal with what to do with school and things like that. But if they can start making things right at home, it's going to make things better for their children. I don't know if anywhere in your book it talks about how it's become part of our genetics now, because we've been eating this stuff for so long that we're having children who are already predisposed to diabetes and some of these problems, to where they're already craving the things that their bodies aren't supposed to crave, because it was in utero that they got it transmitted down to them.
I got to confess, I had to delete probably 100 pages from it's already long enough, and it broke my heart to have to exclude this study and that study. And I'm thinking, well, look, let me give them what I think are the key things to avoid. I mean, beside it being a how-to book of how to avoid or reverse these various diseases, it's also an expose of the big food, big pharma, big medicine. And I even cover, in chapter 7, there was a study that Nina Teicholz and her group, Nina Teicholz, I don't know if you know who she is. She wrote.
Yeah, I'm just glad you said her name, because I always say it the wrong way.
Yeah, no, look, I used to say Nina Teicholz, and it's actually Teicholz. And she wrote this amazing book. It was Book of the Year, The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. And she was the one that really opened up a lot of new studies because of her book. It was groundbreaking, and I got a terrific endorsement from her in the back of the book and inside front cover. But the reason I bring her up is I cover she has this group that she's involved with called Nutrition Coalition, and they're a lobbying group, and they're trying to get the word out about what the truth is about all this stuff, right? And so her and another group, they got together and they did this investigative study into the U.S. dietary guidelines. See, every 5 years they update them or they bring in new ones. And right now we're in the 2020 to 2025 period. And they wanted to do a deep dive into them. And they found out that 95% of the committee members, in other words, 19 out of the 20 committee members, had COI, conflicts of interest, with big food and big pharma. I mean, like General Mills and Kellogg and Dannon, and I can't remember the names of the pharmaceutical. They were receiving financial backing, and so that's why the latest the heart healthy plate, or the plate that's that they say that the kids should eat and everything. In our public schools, it's okay that they eat Lucky Charms and all these sugar cereals for lunch, whereas meat, butter, and cheese are way at the bottom of the list, meaning they're bad for you. I mean, it's like unbelievable, right?
And it's the way these, the organizations that we count on to give us guidance have been so corrupted. And one of the points that you brought up beautifully in the book were two gentlemen that came over from Europe named Procter and Gamble. And
William Procter and James Gamble, that's right.
Yeah, and they came up with a product called Crisco, and they donated, in today's dollars, what would be about $32 million, I think, to the new fledgling American Heart Association, I think it was. And
that's right,
convinced
exactly.
them to endorse this product. And I'm sure they had no conflict of interest. That $32 million did not affect their endorsement at all. And then we found out that Crisco was literally 50% trans fats, which are
Yes.
horrific for our health. So
Oh
can
my
you
God.
speak a little bit to that, about how the institutions that we rely on have been so corrupted by money and
We started eating industrial lubricants as a result.
yes,
Exactly.
yes,
Yeah, they didn't exist before 1865. They were used as lubricant in the Industrial Revolution for all the machines and everything. And then somewhere in the late, 19th century, they looked at a bucket of it and it looked like lard that people cook with. They said, hey, why don't we sell that to people? We can make some money that way, right? And so, and then by 1911, Crisco was flying off the shelves because it was cheap and it was easy to cook with and that kind of thing. And I don't know if it's date coincident kind of, but there's 1911, it starts going on the shelf. The first heart attack medically recorded, as I told you earlier, was 1912. Now, I don't know if those are tied in or not, but everything started coming in the 20th century. The candy, we've never had these sugar and grains they've been there for a long time, but never in the concentrations and the amounts that we have today.
They were
And
rarities. They were confections made by somebody in a specialty industry, not mass produced.
Exactly. And these vegetable oils, the seed oils, there's about 8 or 9 that are just deadly. They've been totally linked. There's 4 ingredients in them. One's called hexane, N-hexane. The other one is HNE, which is 4-hydroxynonenal. And the other one is TBHQ, which is a 40-letter word, the chemical word that I won't even attempt to pronounce right now. And these have found to be neurodegenerative and cause cancer and all these different things in animal studies. And even in, there was a study that they published. The title of it says it all, and they published in the the Journal of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, that the true cause of these diseases were these vegetable oils. Now, of course, there's true olive oil, authentic olive oil. That's okay, and that kind of thing. But these other ones that are made in the factory, they never existed. And I was really fortunate to be able to. My chapter 6 covers all of that, and it's still blowing my mind what I found out. And I was able to get 3 people to add in their expertise, and I borrowed like charts and graphs and that kind of thing. One was Nina Teicholz. She gave me a graph or 2 and that kind of thing. Chris Kenobi, he's an eye surgeon and nutrition researcher, and he's brilliant at all of he took a deep dive into the whole vegetable oils and everything. And also Kate Shanahan, New York Times bestselling author, Dr. Kate Shanahan. And these 2 were at the forefront and the cutting edge of all of the dangers of the vegetable seed oils. And so I contacted each one because each of them had given me a wonderful endorsement. I said, can I use this chart? Because this would really show a lot to my reader about how bad these things are. And so, they were very generous to be able to allow me to put those in the book. So, I got a lot of help from people, but I had to throw it all together, and I'm glad I did. And John, thank you again for all your wonderful comments and questions about
absolutely,
this.
Yeah, it's just a phenomenal book. And Dan, one of the things that is a little interesting is that when we start presenting this information to someone who's a newbie, it could seem so bizarre to them because there's such a disconnect between what they've been hearing their whole life and now what we're telling them. And it's kind of I kind of chalk it up to a couple of different factors, right? So first of all, there's what we just discussed, in that there's so much influence into the institutions that we rely on through special interest groups and influence through money and everything else. Then there's another one that you touched on in the book very well, which is how people just refuse to be confused by the facts. So you mentioned the Minnesota coronary study. It was the largest of its kind. It involved 9,000 men over a 5-year period, and it showed that people with the lowest cholesterol were more than twice as likely to die from heart disease or cancer and it was squashed because the lead researcher said the findings were disappointing. So instead of following the science and reporting it, he squashed it because it didn't agree with the current dogma. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh my God, yes.
It's going to hurt my bottom line.
Yes, that the study from that result, or the results of that study, were buried in some garage somewhere, and I think years later they surfaced. I think it was 2016 or something, and the investigators were looking into it, and they were asking, why didn't you tell us about that? Why didn't we get the results back? Oh, we found the results were disappointing because it didn't match up with what Ansel Keys was pushing, and where all the money was coming from the government, and from because he got a lot of money from the government. I mean, an extraordinarily high amount for that period of time, because loaf of bread was like what, 5 cents or something. And so it's just pretty amazing. And again, like I was telling Dante earlier, when people and money get close together, they just get too tempted or something. I don't know if it's one of our failings, but we have to keep our own personal ethics in and keep the greater good in mind of our fellow humans. What's best for our fellow humans as opposed to what's good for the bottom line. I mean, here's another one that I think it's chapter 7. I go into this. There was this study that Goldman Sachs, the big international banker, they had one of their analysts do a white paper and it was for their big pharma, for their pharma and biochem companies. And it was about the fact that, hey, creating cures is not good for the bottom line. It may be good for society, but it's not good for the bottom line. And the example they gave was this Gilead Sciences, big pharma company. They came up with this blockbuster drug called Harvoni, which had a 96 to 99% cure rate for hepatitis C. And when it first came out, it was like $12 billion or something. And then within a couple of years, it was down 75%, and it continued its descent after that. And so while cures may be good for society, hey, it's not good for the shareholders, so knock it off. Right?
And I've told that story.
Meds we want the ones that they take forever. Blood pressure meds, acid blockers, statins. We want medicines that people take for the rest of their life, whether it's helping them or not.
I've told that story about that particular drug several times, and I think that is probably for me one of the most poignant things that people need to take to mind when they see all these drug commercials that promise all these solutions to all of their problems. Is you got to remember they are not looking for solutions. When they look for solutions, they get punished, just like the company Gilead you're talking about, that they're not going to get any investments if they're going to be coming up with cures. So what does that tell all the companies that are making these medicines? And believe me, I'm sure this is the thing I have to always be careful of, because I'm not a doctor and I'm not here to tell anybody to stop taking whatever medicine their doctor is telling them to take. Don't ever get that that's what I'm trying to say. But what I am trying to say is you got to use your head, and you got to be able to ask your doctor about things, and you got to be able to look into stuff like this, because if you're not looking at what's going on and you find out that the premise for why they're making these medicines is not to cure you or make you better, the premise is to get you hooked on something, then you need to rethink your philosophy. And then you start to look around and you say, well, who do I talk to? What doctor do I ask? What do I read? And that's what I wanted to point out about your book, is that this is exactly because so many topics that you've covered, I've covered on this show, and I still get question after question after question about these same things. And I mentioned before that somebody who's healthy, this is a good book for them to read. As a carnivore reading this book, and I'm going to give my quick opinion on just what little I've read as a carnivore, because I've been a carnivore for 3.5 years. I have a hard time with anything that talks about eating berries or granola and stuff like that, and I know you were on a different path then. But my belief that even carnivores should read this book, because what we have a hard time with is those who are around us. Just like one of the ladies I was reading in the chat here earlier, and I hope you don't mind me pulling this out, Fran, but she said she had the hardest time thinking that butter and fat is good for me. I always associated fat with heart attacks. Well, you have a good reason for associating it with that. You've been told that by everybody who's supposedly a specialist out there. But when you've got a book like this that you can have in your hands that has all of the citations, you said over 1,200 citations, more than 5 times what your average medical book has. So, and as a history major, I know how important it is. When I was in college, I studied history. You had to be able to cite things. And because I was always at odds politically with my professors, whenever I had to write anything about history, believe me, my citations had to be bulletproof. Those citations are going to give you the ammunition you need as a carnivore to show your friends you've got to make a change if you want to get out of the cycle, this loop that you're in, where specifically those big 3 things that your book, The Unholy Trinity, points out. If you ever want to have that healthy life that you're looking for, if you want to stop having chronic inflammation, we talk about inflammation being the problem. Obviously, inflammation is actually something that your body does that's very important to deal with problems. But when it's nonstop, it's actually killing you. And those 3 things, removing those, will deal with that chronic inflammation better than just about anything else you could do. And then when you've got other issues, like I have gut issues that led me to the carnivore diet. The reason why I didn't go the route of keto, I went straight in the back door. You and Dr. Baker talked about how you went through the front door of keto, then ketovore, then carnivore. I was at the end of my rope. And I know there's people out there that are at the end of their rope, and they might need to try something as drastic as liondiet like I did to save their life, because the pain can be so much of a problem. And when it deals with your gut, it makes you crazy too. It really affects your mental health when your gut's not right. So I just wanted to be able to point that out for carnivores that are looking, why should I read this book? Especially when you wrote it, you weren't a carnivore, and now you found your way to carnivore. What say you about that?
Well, like I said early on in our conversation, keto itself, if the world would find keto, because that's 80 to 90% animal fat and protein anyway, right? It's very low carbohydrates if you go true keto. So it's not, we're kissing cousins between the all meat, the carnivore, and keto. It's very, it's just very evolutionarily consistent. And I got to tell you, there was, with one last thing on the statins, pardon me, I got this study from Dr. Lustig, brilliant guy, and this is amazing. I have this up on my website. It's danieltrevor.com. I have a 7-minute video that gives my story and all that, but I tell about this study that he turned me on to, where it was a large study. I can't remember. It was a meta-analysis. It involved 92,135 patients. And the researchers wanted to know, how much longer do the statin takers extend their lives? Was it months, years, decades? What? And they followed them over a long time, and they found that those in the group taking statins for primary prevention, in other words, no heart attack yet, your doctor just wants you to take it because of your LDL or whatever nonsense that he's pointing out. The people that were taking it for primary prevention, no heart attack yet, lived a big 3 days longer than those in the other group not taking a statin. And those in the group taking a statin for secondary prevention, in other words, they already had a heart attack, they lived the big 4 days longer than those in the other group taking a statin. So I asked my readers in the book, do you still want to put up with the nasty side effects of taking statins? Because for some people, they can be pretty damn nasty with, aches and pains and road rage and psychoses, and you drop at least 20 or 30 IQ points. And it's just, so, you got to look at that. You'll see that I talk about that in the video.
Well, you know what, Dan, again, if I could offer an answer on your behalf to that question as well, because, anyone who's a carnivore for at least 30 days, hopefully people try it for at least 90. But if you're a carnivore for 30 days, you're going to know that things are happening. I mean, just out of my group of friends and family that I've turned on to carnivore, thankfully Dante turned me on to carnivore, I turned all these other people on carnivore, they know that things are happening. I'm seeing miracles happen around me. arthritis going away, anxiety, depression going away, acid reflux going away, all kinds of aches and pains going. It's endless, energy levels, etc. So anyone who's a carnivore, and you do it for at least a month, hopefully a few months, you're going to see all these things happening, and you're going to feel like a different person. Now, with the problem you run into is when you go to your doctor and you get one of these dingbat AMA white coat doctors who are basically glorified pharmacists, because medical school is basically pharmacy school. 95% of the tests of the studies in medical school textbooks were funded by Big Pharma. So then the doctor gives you some sort of nonsense dogma, and you say, wait a minute, the doctor's saying this. That's why Dan's book is phenomenal. So, for example, in response to the question that your reader had there, Dante, about, I can't believe I'm going to eat butter and fat, I'm going to cite something that I saw in Dan's book, and I wrote this down to talk about a study. It followed 1,000 elderly patients over 10 years, found that the ones with the highest LDL had the least all-cause mortality, meaning they lived the longest. They had the least amount of heart disease, the least incidence of cancer, the least amount of infectious disease, the least amount of hypertension, least amount of strokes, and scored the highest in cognitive testing. The 300 that were on statins scored the lowest on their cognitive tests. So this type of information is what you need as a carnivore. You know it's working. You feel amazing. You could feel that it's your whole life is transformed. But now you have, maybe it's your doctor, maybe it's your wife, maybe it's the person next door, and they're whispering in your ear, up, wait a minute, fat, oh, heart attack, up. When you read Dan's book, you have all the information. You have the facts. It's phenomenal. I've never seen anything that puts it together in quite this way. And I think that is the biggest reason for anyone who's already a carnivore to read the book, anyone who's already on keto to read the book, and also anybody who's not yet on that path, but would like to get all the health benefits, would like to lose the weight, but also get the many, and even more significant off-scale benefits of low anxiety, getting rid of depression, getting rid of acid reflux, getting rid of arthritis, IBS, Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia, skin problems, everything. To read the book, because it gives you a firm foundation, and you understand from the inside out why this is the right way to go. That's my view on it.
John, where do I send the check? No,
Hey,
thank
man,
you. That's wonderful.
It's from the heart.
Again,
Yeah.
It's just, thank you so much. But yeah, if people could just go to, again, like you, Dante, I'm not a doctor or scientist, and none of this is meant as medical information or advice. You get that from the guy who can be paid from insurance and not attacked by the community at large and all that kind of thing. Because, there's some forces in the world that really don't want us to survive well, because I think the top, most influential, most rich and elite of the planet are all upset about this thing called overpopulation. And there's just too many people. There's World Economic Forum. Their stated ideal population, global population, is 500,000. So that means there's a lot of weeding of the ant farm that has to take place. And there's a lot of ways they're up to in doing that. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't want the overlords of the World Economic Forum and the WHO and to come down on your channel. So I'm not going to get into that. Just look at chapter 12 and you'll see some of the corruption that goes on there. And because it's just pretty sad. But the thing is that we're getting the word out. And when I discovered you, I thought, oh, man, this is my brother from another mother. He's just doing awesome work, getting the word out about the proper human diet and how these evolutionarily developed meat bodies are used to eating for millions of years. And with regard to the berries and all that, I was telling Kerry Mann on his podcast a few weeks ago, I said, look, Kerry, if you and I were out hunting 12,000 years ago. And we came across some berries that had just come back into season. We go, holy shit. We would tell Uncle Throgbagog, and he would tell the tribe, and we all go have some berries because they weren't going to be around that long, right? So I was delighted to see Dr. Berry say, hey, yeah, we have some berries once in a while. And I'll have a little bit of berries. But it's just, we got to use our brains with this too. We didn't say 12,000 years ago, oh, wait, it's that part of the carnivore diet. I can't eat that. If I have berries, I have what's the equivalent of maybe 2 teaspoons, when I savor it in my mouth and that kind of thing. If I feel like I need a sugar or a sweetness type thing. But the more you get into the keto carnivore journey and lion diet, as you know, your taste buds' desire for the sensation of sweetness just kind of goes away. You don't need that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I used to be a big sweets lover, and now, the other day I had a craving because I was going through some emotional things. I got a lot going on in my life right now, and I can tell you one thing, stress is a big part of all of this as well. But when I thought about having a treat, for me, it was having one of my old favorite hamburgers with ketchup and bread and everything else with it, and I thought, I just don't want it. And I was able to resist it, but it used to be all the sweet things. You can get over your cravings for sweets. You can get over that need that you think you have for sweets. It just takes getting it out of your system. It's like getting over a bad drug. If you've got a very strong drug that's got a hold on you, you've got to get it out of your system long enough for you not to be craving it all the time. And once you do, you'll find I can get back to normal life. I can get back to that normal way that I can live and not be addicted to this garbage, not react every time I see a commercial for a Snickers bar or the new Nerds candy or something else. I talked about the other day, they've mixed a gummy bears or something with Nerds, and I'm thinking, my gosh, they're mixing candies now to make them twice as sweet as they would be. Now I've got a few questions here, and I told you, Daniel, we were going to be about an hour, and here we are approaching hour number 2 because I told you we were going to have a good time. So I hope I haven't kept you too long. I'm kind of up against a hard stop, but I wanted to get some questions in from some viewers. We had a couple of super chats come in from people who were just supportive, and I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you. That helps the channel, helps me to keep doing what I'm doing and spending time doing this and sharing information like this. We had a super chat come in that I might be able to answer, but I'm betting John might be able to also, but I want to give Daniel the first swing at it. Blood glucose and triglycerides creeping up on pure carnivore. How so? If you don't have any thoughts, I do.
I'm unfamiliar with that because, as I said, I started with keto, then went to ketovore, and which is all very close to carnivore. And by the way, I was clarifying that with Dr. Sean Baker when I was on with him on Tuesday, that most people, when they hear carnivore, they think it's all meat. And I have to say, no, that's what's called the lion diet. That's what you're doing. Carnivore is specifically ruminant meat. Yeah, ruminant, yeah. But carnivore is just, whether it's eggs, beef, bacon, butter, it's just animal products. It's not just meat. So anyway, yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but you might want to take a stab at that.
All right. Well, one of the things, I don't know if John looks, yeah, he's there. Did you have any thoughts on it, John?
Why don't you lead off, Dante?
Okay. The reason why I've seen that is, for one, like for instance, I got one of my best readings. It was the triglycerides were so low that the doctor said, I've never seen anybody have low, technically, triglycerides. She said, there is no such thing as low. It's not really a thing like if it's outside of the normal range that it's a bad thing. But she was just surprised to see somebody have low triglycerides. The next time I got tested, I was just in the low side of normal. But one thing I have found about all these blood tests is it really depends on what you ate recently can make a big difference. How much stress you're under can make a big difference. It's not just the food that makes all the difference in these numbers having a fluctuation. I found this out also about checking for thyroid hormone. Like, you can check your TSH one day and it'll say that you're way off the charts. And then you can check that same TSH. Like, if you did a blood test one day and then came back the next time the same day and did the same thing you did that morning, it could be a totally different result. So some of these blood tests can vary greatly. Some of them are going to vary just a little bit. I've also heard people talk about how if they eat a lot of fat just before they go to get the blood test, that it can make their cholesterol numbers look lower than when they go and they don't do that. So there are some things that these blood tests, whenever you ask a doctor, try to pin down what the blood test number means. You'll find that their answer is often very mushy. They're like, well, it could be this, and really it's because they don't know either. They're just looking at the normal range and trying to get an idea if you fall within the guidelines they want you to be in. So, I mean, you don't necessarily want your triglycerides to be zero. I'm not an expert enough on how all that works to know, but I do know that if your triglycerides are in the low range, that is a very healthy marker for you. I know that if your HDL is above the mid-normal range or anywhere in the normal range, or in my case where it was above, it was actually considered high. Doctor still says that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a sign. Those two together and having a good waistline, those three, you've got excellent metabolic health. You mentioned about 50% of people, Daniel, being overweight these days. Well, it's like 88% of people have metabolic disorder, and they're not realizing that just being slim doesn't necessarily mean they're in shape. Like you were talking about when you came into this, because maybe their HDL was way low and their triglycerides were way high. They just didn't carry it as a bunch of body fat. So those three together are a big part of that. But yes, you're going to see different numbers when you do these tests.
I'd like to throw a couple things in there too. First of all, I would keep an eye on stress, as you mentioned, because stress certainly is going to give you a cortisol release. Also, the timing of when the test is done could be significant, because as you know, we always have the dawn effect. We have a cortisol release a few hours before we wake up, which is kind of getting our body going. So if the blood test is done in the morning, it's a possibility that you could, as a result of higher cortisol, that raises your blood sugar, because cortisol is like an adrenaline type factor there, and it's going to cause a blood sugar rise. So it could be related to that. I'd also make sure that you're not eating any products that have sugar that you don't realize. For example, a lot of bacon has sugar in it. Make sure your bacon doesn't have sugar. You're not eating like a beef jerky that might be a sugared product, or cured products that have sugar in them. And then also make sure that you're eating enough fat, because if you're not eating enough fat and you're only eating pure lean meats, well, then your body is going to have to create glucose through gluconeogenesis, because you're not getting enough energy from the fats. So your body is going to have to create blood sugar basically through gluconeogenesis in the liver, converting protein into glucose. So I would say make sure you have enough fat, make sure that your stress is under control, whether that involves getting more exercise, doing meditation, whatever. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, go to bed early enough, don't eat too late at night to make sure that you get enough good sleep. And then think about the timing of the test. It could be that if you're doing it very early and you're in the middle of a cortisol rise, those could be factors there.
Very good. We got a few other questions here. This one looks like it's directed at me. Nancy Chandler asked, I have the same lump as you on my left foot. I have Viking's disease. It's genetic. Did you get any answers for your lump? No, I haven't. I know it's plantar fibroma, and apparently it's caused by overstressing the muscle. I was doing a whole lot of sprinting early on this year. I probably dove in a little too hard, as I typically do when it comes to anything, when it comes to exercise. And the one thing I can warn anybody about is to be careful that you don't overdo things too fast. It's just one of those hard-headed things that I bang my head against the wall my whole life. Whenever I get into something, I go hard and fast, and I've been known to be one that rushes in where angels fear to tread, and then I wind up in a bad situation. I hope yours isn't the same thing. I don't know what Viking's disease is, but I wish you all the best with it, Nancy. I hope you're able to get that worked out. I will say for the plantar fibroma, I've been using lacrosse balls, which are not as hard as a baseball, but they're harder than a tennis ball, and I use them to rub that spot to try to help get that to go away. Let's see here. Another question. Somebody asked potassium. Lady told me that we all get too much, and I should just focus on real salt, magnesium, and calcium. Any thoughts? I can tell you from my experience, it is almost impossible to get exactly down what you need your electrolytes to be, because it doesn't seem to be any way to test it directly, because all of my tests have always come up perfect, whether I was using a lot of supplements for potassium, magnesium, and those kind of things, or if I wasn't using hardly any at all, it would always be around the same number. But I will say that you can get too much of potassium because it can affect your heart rhythm regulation. So you can either have too little or too much. It is something to possibly watch out for. But the reason these supplements are sold the way they are is because the medical system looks at them as something that doesn't really fix anything. So it's not a health product. And most of the time on almost all of these things like potassium and magnesium, whatever your body doesn't need, you're just going to urinate it out anyway. So that's why I'm saying is that I get a good bit of these supplements, but not a tremendous amount. And my numbers always come out the same. When I first started doing this way of eating, I wasn't doing anything except salt, and my numbers came out the same. The only thing I've noticed is that I like to use, as a lot of people know, I use Redmond Relight products for my supplements, and I just find they help me when I'm working out in the sun more. I love the taste of it, and I use unflavored. So that's one of the things I would say about that. But there is a possibility when it comes to too much potassium. Are you aware of anything like that, John or Daniel?
I'd be very careful with potassium because of the effect on the heart. So I would really, I don't know what to advise on supplementing that. I'd be more inclined to go with one of the generic, whether it's E-Lite or the packets that people get that have a general mix of electrolytes. And I would certainly stay away from specific potassium supplementation unless it was directed by a medical professional. I'd be very careful.
All right. Let's see. Squee Dow says, question, I have an appointment with a carnivore cardiologist on Wednesday. I wonder who that would be.
Whoa.
Is that Dr. Ovadia, maybe? I don't know. I don't know that he's fully carnivore. I don't remember. We go over tests.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, okay, good. I think at one point he wasn't, but like many others, he's coming on board. That's awesome. He says
he knew he was on his, he was, he had to lose a lot of weight too. And he knew that he was scheduled for his, if he kept on the same path, he was going to be on his own operating table, so he dropped 100 pounds and he's full carnivore.
So Squeedow wants to know what he should ask this doctor when he goes in there. By the way, he has had the jab, as they call it. So I'm not sure that's a little bit of information, but I don't know that we have enough information to necessarily tell him what you should ask. I can't think of any questions specifically I would want to ask a carnivore cardiologist without knowing what your health situation is.
I think it's fantastic that he's going to carnivore cardiologist in the first place.
Yeah.
Because just the fact that he's speaking with someone who's on the leading edge means that he's already going to be bypassing the potential problems of listening to nonsense like don't eat saturated fats or take statins or let's worry about your cholesterol. Or he's not going to have to deal with any of that nonsense. So you're on a great track.
The first question I would ask is, how did you find carnivore? Give me the story, and were you suffering from something? Were you overweight? What's the deal? Fill me in,
That's a great question. Asking the doctor, how did you become this? How did you take this route? Because when you go to a doctor and he's telling you got to drop some weight and he's sitting there 280 pounds himself, it's like, why am I listening to you? Well, if you go in there and you see this guy and he's in great shape and he's a carnivore cardiologist, ask him how he found out about it so that way he can explain to you why we're doing this, and I'm sure he'll probably do it anyway. Great point.
Who's he following? Is he following Sean Baker? Is he following this one, that one? He had to discover it somewhere, right? So I would definitely tune in on that, ask him that, because, these days, a lot of doctors, you go in, let's say you did make all these wonderful changes and you dropped 40 pounds, 30 pounds, whatever, and all your chemical panel and everything looks wonderful. And he's going, wow, whatever it is, keep doing it. And then if you tell him, oh yeah, I'm doing this and this, and he'll go, high fat. Oh, that's interesting. It's never like, Really? Tell me more. It's just, they find it interesting because it's so outside their kit bag, their toolkit. They don't know what to do with it. So, I would definitely ask him how he came to that realization that it's going to be good for him.
Having come from something like a keto version of the diet, Daniel, maybe there's not really much of a question here, but maybe you can understand what she's asking. Or Seaweed Hero, wild salmon and wild sardine based keto, pesca keto. I guess they're asking if that's a healthy route.
Well, look, it's just low carb, high fat protein. And, that's the whole thing with keto. And then right next door is Ketovore, which is more fats in animal products. And then the full carnivore is just animal products only. There's no asparagus, there's no salads, there's no nothing. And then you're, where you've ended up, along with, what's that, Dr. Jordan Peterson? He's a total meathead like you, right?
I love being
and
a meathead.
No, it's wonderful. Look, whatever's going to work, and it's very ancestral. See, a lot of these bodies, they grew up near bodies of water over millions of years, and they're going to have more. They would have had more fish in their diet, and others are more inland, and they're not going to have those as much fish. So, yes, of course, because your proteins and fats, those are going to be low carbohydrates. That's the main thing. You want to be low carb, high fat.
I think I was getting Dr. Ovidia mixed up with somebody else. That's why I pointed out that.
The sardines and the salmon. I think the sardines and the salmon are certainly good choices because they're fatty. And I would say if somebody wanted to be, as she said, a pesca keto, you would just want to avoid doing something like eating tuna all the time. Because if you're eating canned tuna, you're going to be getting a lot of mercury and very little fat. Whereas if you're eating salmon, you're going to be getting a good amount of fat. Salmon, sardines, stick to salmon, sardines, mackerel, things that are going to give you the good fat, because you really do need the fat as a component there.
Johnny, how come you're so smart? What's your background? Got to tell me. Fill me in here. Are you self-taught like Daniel Trevor?
Yeah, absolutely, man. We're two peas in the pod, Dan, for sure. It's I've been following kind of health and wellness since my dad kind of got me going back in the 1970s. He was back, started when the health food craze, if you remember, when that kind of kicked in. And he was following the luminaries on the radio, on AM radio at the time. And there was Carlton Fredericks, who got replaced by Ronald Hoffman. And there was a whole series of guys. And kind of followed through the years. Back in the day in the 70s, that was kind of a different time. So that was when health food meant let's make our own bread and let's eat wheat germ and granola and eat low fat and that kind of thing.
I remember that. I was around in the 70s. Hey, I'm an old timer too.
So at least we were starting to think about things, at least at that time. And then, but as things progressed, I kind of, stayed with it and stayed on the leading edge and learned, long ago that it was definitely high fat and low carb was the way to go. Of course, as Dr. Atkins came in, that was really helpful. I kind of moved on from that to the carnivore because the carnivore had, I felt was, more of the ancestral and less of the product oriented things like, some of the keto with Atkins, it was a lot of bars and chemical things. So I kind of moved on to the carnivore because I wanted more of the natural whole foods and, kind of just self-taught, same way you are, Dan. The only difference is I haven't put it together as beautifully as you have in your book. And so thank you for doing that. It's really, really helpful.
Well, one thing John has done, John has created something that you could see here called the Carnivore Knowledge Base. It's carnivoreknowledge.com, where he's put together just tons of videos that are organized into categories so that they cover different topics to make things a lot easier for people to be able to find the things that you're looking for. Looks like we lost him again. He's calling back in. But he put that together to make things a lot easier for people. And between that and your book, and then of course I've got FerrignoFreedom.com, which kind of tells my story, but all of these things, we've just put tools together. And I think that's what's so awesome about people who are on this track is, yes, we all got to make a living, but at the same time, we're not trying to cut each other's throat and trying to get ahead of somebody else or beat somebody else to the punch. If we got knowledge we can share, we're all sharing it because we want everybody to get healthier. That's our goal. Is I want to be able to share the experience I've had. I want people to feel as good as I do compared to the way I did before, and to be able to wear the pants that you wanted to wear and to chisel off that body, that exterior. Like I used to always talk about when I was a heavy guy, I'd say, man, I wish I could just unzip this thing and take it off because I got to carry it around everywhere I go. And it feels like I've been able to do that. And that's what's so wonderful. And that's what I love about all this. And again, just in case anybody missed it, the book is The Unholy Trinity: How Carbs, Sugars, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted, and How to Escape Their Grip. I think this would be important for anybody to have that wants to have ammunition in their hands to be able to show, here are the studies, here are the things that you're asking about. Because so many times when I'm talking to people, it's like, it's all in here, but it's hard for me to say, well, look, here it is. This is it. Because if it's just me saying it, it doesn't have the effect of seeing it not only written in a book, but with scientific evidence to show the backing of all the things you're talking about, to show proof about who was doing what, who was taking money from who, and how this got financed a certain way. And I'll give you the last word, Daniel, as we wrap up this live stream.
Well, listen, thank you so much for all the kind words from you, Dante, as well as you, John. I really appreciate it. And again, you don't make a ton of money selling health books, but I've become very wealthy in the fact that it is helping a lot of people. And, learn the different things and prepare for your visit to the doctor with certain questions that you can, because you're armed with the studies now in the book, because I have so many that we couldn't fit them in the book. What I had to do is I stole this idea from Dr. Robert Lustig, and he had a book that had, I don't know, close to 1,000 references. And he says, there were so many, and it was the same thing with me. It would have made it an extra 100 pages and this and that, because mine was even beyond his. And he says, what we did is we threw it up on the website. You can go there. You can find all the references. They're broken down in what chapters. And, you also have if there's a rabbit hole that you want to go down to investigate, I provide a link. You just click on it. It takes you directly to the source data. That way you can read it for yourself. So you can know that none of this is Daniel Trevor's opinion. So it's danieltrevor.com. Again, I have a 7-minute video that gives my story and so forth. And yeah, there it is. And then if you scroll down underneath that, you'll see the video, and you scroll down a little further, you'll start seeing all these amazing endorsements that I got from all these incredible people. Hey, there's Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Eric Berg, and all of them. So, I was really flattered by all that. And what you can do is I offer a free preview to the book. And what that is, it's the first 48 pages of the book. You sign up, you get on the list. It says free preview. You can unsubscribe at any time. But I send out a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter that either gives an excerpt from the book that has some alarming information, kind of like what you heard in this bit with you, or some kind of new thing that's just come out, And that way you get on the mailing list, and I send things out on a regular basis. And and if you have any questions, you can always hit reply to the emails I send out. And I do my best to get to as many as I can. Send me whatever you can. And if I have your answer for you, then I'll say, here's what I would do if I were you. But I would also check with your doctor about this, this, and this, because, again, I'm not a doctor and I can't give medical advice. Otherwise, the overlords of the universe would be coming down on all of us, right? So, yeah, danieltrevor.com. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. And there's not many places where you can state all of this wild information people just never get to hear. So it's wonderful that you're allowing us to air all this.
I'm glad to be able to have you here, and I'm glad it's getting more information out to more people. I know Dr. Barry's live stream has a much larger audience, but you never know. There's probably at least 1,000 people that follow my channel who haven't heard about any of this. And if it's going to keep on spreading like that, it's just going to help more people get healthy. And that's why I keep coming back week after week to talk about it, because I haven't gone outside yet and seen everybody has started to get their health together. Matter of fact, I keep going outside, and it saddens me, because I want to be able to tell people, you can fix what you're doing here. What you have going on can be fixed. It's not as hard as you think. It's going to take a lifestyle change, no doubt, but it's not going to be hard in the sense that you're going to be miserable doing it. I was so happy doing it. Most people, at least from what I've come into, have found that going on a carnivore way of eating has been a breeze for them, because it's not like choking down salads and eating pita breads or whatever it is that people told us were healthy before. All the stuff back in the 80s and 90s they told me that I had to do to stay healthy were the most miserable things in the world, and who wanted to eat that stuff? So
yeah.
It's just good that we've got this information available, and I thank you guys for both being here again today. I thank all of you who tuned in today to watch. I appreciate you guys being here, and I hope you'll share this video with your friends. And if you haven't already ordered the book, there's a link in the description. You can go to danieltrevor.com and order your book there. And if there's anything else that you need information on, be sure to send me an email, and I'll see if there's something I can do. The email is also in the description. If there's nothing else you guys got, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, because I got to get going.
John, Dante, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.
Great meeting you, Dan.
It was a pleasure,
you too.
guys.
Likewise.
Everyone have a good day.
Yeah.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?